On Wayward Son by TinyButFierce. Chapter 5. A figure wearing a blue baseball cap walked through the streets of Queens. The tall blonde man kept his head down and flickered his eyes back and forth. The sun shined down on the streets and cars rushed past. A conversation caught the attention of the man. Stopping at a newspaper stand, he pretended to read the headlines while listening to the conversation. According to the Spider-Man watch list, he should be swinging through here sometime tonight. Why do you want to see him? Are you kidding me? He's so cool. I just want to be able to see a real-life superhero with my own eyes. You're such a nerd. Hey now, didn't you? The conversation faded away and the blonde man glanced around. The older guy with glasses and a moustache running the newspaper stand, who looked a tad bit familiar to Steve, interrupted his thoughts. Hey, are you going to buy a paper or what? Steve made a non-committal noise and casually walked away. Once he was out of range of the newspaper stand, the older man turned to his next customer and remarked about the interaction. Superheroes these days, they all think we don't know who they are. Steve, ignorant of the remark, walked over to a coffee place that had outdoor seating. He ordered a drink and sat down, waiting to see if Spider-Man would swing past. The chair next to him pulled out with a loud grating noise, and a curly-haired teenager sat down across from him and began to sketch in her notebook. Steve stared at her. She continued to draw. Steve continued to stare. He cleared his throat. What are you doing? She looked up and smiled scarily at him. I like drawing people who are trying to be sneaky. I used to draw people in distress. You just presented the perfect opportunity. I don't know what you're talking about. She glanced upwards and made direct eye contact. Don't you? Steve frowned and looked away, flicking his eyes periodically over to where she sat. She continued to sketch until finally she laughed and turned the paper to face him. Look, it's you. A drawing of Steve in his full Avengers uniform and shield appeared on her paper, and she grinned at the shock that plastered across his face. Wait, how did you... Before he could finish his sentence, a shadow passed over the table. Both parties at the table looked up to see Spider-Man swinging by. As he went past, he waved. Hey, MJ. Hey, Spider-Man. Steve stood up to follow the vigilante, but was distracted by MJ clearing her throat. Where are you going in such a rush, Steve? The super soldier paused. Before he could come up with a response, Spider-Man disappeared around the corner of the street and was lost from view. A buzzing was heard and MJ took out her phone and glanced at a text. She stood up to leave. You can do what you want. I don't care anymore. Steve looked at her phone, a brand new Stark phone, and commented on it. I didn't think those were on the market yet. She looked down at the phone and responded to Steve, completely deadpan. Oh, I have a friend. His dad gave me a mission to stop someone from doing something they'd regret. This was my payment. She smiled at Steve and turned to leave. Have a nice day, Steve Rogers. Natasha walked through the corridors of the Avengers compound. As she approached the wing where most of the housing rooms were located, she stopped at the only ajar door with the nameplate Steve Rogers attached to it. Knocking on the open door to get his attention, she walked through to the sight of Steve on the computer, watching videos of Spider-Man on the screen. Natasha crossed her arms, and Steve spun around on the chair. Hey, Natasha, how are you today? The spy raised an eyebrow and gestured to his computer. Steve turned to look at it and then turned back towards the spy with an embarrassed smile on his face. He sighed and began to speak. What are you doing, Steve? I'm just doing some research. It seems to me like you're doing something that one of our teammates doesn't want you to be doing. Steve looked at Natasha with a confused expression on his face. Are you on his side now? The spy sighed again. I hate this, Steve. I hate that we've been torn into two sides. We used to be a family. Why must you and Tony keep doing this? I can't trust Tony if he keeps secrets from us. He can't trust you if you can't trust him to protect someone he cares about. The word trust is thrown around so much. Why do you have to know everything he does? You certainly didn't tell him about the things he should have known. I had to protect Bucky. Natasha stared down at the super soldier, who was now standing up and gesturing around. Her expression was completely blank, and Steve calmed down in confusion after the silence reigned for what felt like a minute. The spy began to speak. Steve, you are such a big hypocrite. You kept secrets about the death of your teammate's parents, and you're criticizing him for protecting his son. At least we know he has one. You never told him anything. You knew about it too. You told me that you would tell him. Thought that you would keep your word. You keep talking of trust, but you chose my side instead of Stark's. Oh, Steve, I was on Stark's side. I agreed with the Accords. I only switched to yours because I was scared that the Avengers would separate. I regret that decision. Separated anyways, and now I have to try and make it up to someone who once regarded me as family. So you just sit here and think about that. Steve stared at Natasha in shock and lowered his head. The spy turned around and began to walk out the door. He paused at the entryway and looked back at the super soldier. You both want to protect the people you love and care about. Trust will come once you allow him to do that without prying. The spy left the room and closed the door on her way out. Steve sat in his chair and stared at the floor.